But it actually is the title of an article that my colleague and I, Sherry Moriali, published in a Journal of International Communication this fall, following the invasion by the Russians of Ukraine. We were so seriously concerned because when we did research in Russia and Poland in 2012, there were signs of the changes that were coming, and people were telling us what was going to happen in ways that we found virtually unbelievable. And so we write about this in the article, and that's where the title comes from. We were haunted then by our experiences, particularly in Russia, but learned a great deal in Poland. And I'm going to share some of that with you. But it went on into the 2016 election, midterm research we did in the middle of the Trump presidency, then into the pandemic and through January 6th. So I'm going to take you on a fast ride, but with what I think can positively be done. Because in fact, we have seen some very positive results from some of the work we're doing in intentional trust building. But today, we are at a time in our history, 9/11, reflecting back to 2001. But this weekend, in fact, with the death of Queen Elizabeth, we're thinking about someone who has been on the stage of history through enormous change and in a seat of relevance for over 70 years. What she has seen and the presence that she presented has been in stark contrast to many other leaders in this time period, although admittedly, her role is, of course, very, very different. But 9/11 and how we as a people in the United States came together is markedly different than how we are today. And that's not just my interpretation. There are numerous valid studies that really indicate that, and I think most of us know that at an experiential level. So what I want to talk about today is work that my colleagues and I have been doing for over 20 years in terms of what determines how to build trust between people in organizations, political leaders, communities, including churches. Now, I have not been trying to do that in this church specifically, just so you know. You have not been part of my research program, except in a quiet, observational sort of way, although it would have been fertile in the past few years. But on the other hand, I want to talk about our experiences in Poland and Russia in 2012 and our use of the trust model that we developed in the 2016 election, in the midterms of Donald Trump's presidency, and then during the pandemic and January 6th. Now, I'm not going to talk about the research. I have citations for those of you who want to look at it. But what is the power that communities have to make some positive change? And one of the things I want to debunk, people say, oh, we want trusting relationships, and there are hundreds and hundreds, thousands actually, of articles you can read on how important it is to build trusting relationships, and most of it is not based on any kind of research that helps you actually do that. But it's a myth that there is nothing we can do about trust, when in fact everything we do either builds trust or degrades from trust. Trust results from the behaviors that we engage in, individually and collectively, on a daily basis. So, how did I get to Russia and Poland in 2012? Well, I was invited to present this trust model that we'd begun developing in the year 2000 by an international conference in Warsaw, Poland. And the model had been funded because we couldn't have afforded the research in any other way, but the International Association of Business Communicators in the year 2000 for an international group, and it was a project that I had the privilege of leading, where we were asked to see if we can define more clearly whether or not there were drivers or factors that helped individuals and organizations build trust across different types of cultures, different languages, types of organizations, sizes of organizations, and in all different types of circumstances. Well, obviously, we didn't get in all different types of circumstances. But we did conduct our work in multiple countries and languages. We were in Europe, the U.S., India, Taiwan, Mexico, China, and Brazil for the original work. But we wanted to go to Poland, and obviously wanted to try to go to Russia. 10,000 studies, and no one had been allowed to do this type of work in Russia. So we're going to try to go to Russia when we could go to Poland. So we had done the work and had come up, and they wanted me to talk about this in going to Poland. We had come up with, and I promise this is the only statistical word I'm going to use for the rest of the talk, with psychometrically solid 5 predictors that were stable across cultures, organizations, languages, 5 predictors of trust, and they were then related to a variety of outcomes. In profit organizations, sustained profit over years. In nonprofit organizations, goal achievement, employee satisfaction, employee retention, and a variety of other variables. In interpersonal relationships, strength and lasting of the relationships and satisfaction with relationships, a whole lot of positive outcomes, a massive amount of data. So they wanted us to come to Poland and say, how do you use these drivers and what are they? Well, let me tell you specifically what we found. And you're going to say it is not rocket science, and it is not. In fact, it is common sense, but it's not common practice. There's a difference. And we added one in our research to what had been commonly in the literature previously. The ones that were commonly out there were, you've got to be open and honest. And while it's different in different cultures, what is open and honest, how that is articulated and manifested is different. Open and honest went across all different types of cultures. Whether you were concerned for other people, stakeholders, and others. Whether you were concerned, but not just in words, but in action. Whether you walked the talk. Whether you were reliable. Whether you did what you said you were going to do. Now, not to be confused with sameness. Whether you did what you said you were going to do, and if you had to change it, did you tell people you were going to change it, and why? Most people retreat when they have to change and don't tell people why they're going to do that. Identification. Do we have similar values and goals? This may be one of the hardest ones. It's really easy to trust people who value what I value. And this is where we are in deep, deep difficulty in the United States today. We tend to trust people who have similar values and viewpoints of our own. Makes sense, right? It isn't getting us very far in our increasingly polarized world. That we can trust only those who think the way we do, vote the way we do, value that which we value. But we added something, and this is we, meaning our research. We didn't add it, out of whim. We added something that wasn't there, competence. I don't really, bedrock, trust people who aren't competent in the areas where I am needing them to be competent. I may like you, I may think you're honest, you're reliable, you're concerned for me, but if you don't know what you're doing, I will not fully trust you. We found that to be interestingly important in ways people had not considered before. Of course, I'm trustworthy. Now, I haven't bothered to stay current. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not handling, in a marriage, I'm not handling our money worth a cent. We are in trouble. But I'm trustworthy. I love you. I care for you. I know what we're doing. We've always done it this way. We don't need to change. And what we found is some of the most difficult relationships and fractured families came because the competence factor was not paid attention to. So, What happened in Poland? Well, instead of taking a fee to go to Poland and do the presentation, we asked our hosts if they would help us get interviews. Would they help us do our research? So in Poland, we wanted to talk to people who are entrepreneurs, small business owners, individuals who worked for nonprofit and or government organizations. We were so close to Russia, we decided we wanted to give it a shot. Now, you had to get a visa, and you have to tell the truth of why you are going to the country, or it could be much worse. I would not want to still be there and doing this by some form of restricted Zoom back to the church, meaning being in jail. But the reality is, it took several months and Homeland Security assisting us to get a visa to do trust research in Russia. It was not an easy matter. We quickly learned from colleagues who had done research in both Poland and Russia that we needed to be well aware that we may not be trusted at all because we were from the United States. We were doing research on whether people trusted each other in cultures that were generally known to be low-trust environments. Poland and Russia, we had different experiences, but they're important and they say a lot about the United States of today. Although we were not asking in either country anything about the historic contexts in which they were living, every single person we interviewed in either country, including people in their 20s, described World War II to us in the interview. I have never in any other country in the world in which I have worked, and I've worked in several, ever had 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and 40-year-olds talking about the importance of World War II. There are people in the United States who don't even understand what World War II was, and they are in our colleges and universities today. And I'm not denigrating, I'm just saying history as a part of a context is so fresh in Poland. It was 2012, and in Poland, every single person we interviewed, it was October of 2012, asked us what was going to happen in November in the election. They asked us if Obama was going to be reelected. Well, being a trained interviewer, you never say what you think. You say, what do you think should happen? Right? And immediately they said, well, we don't like him at all because he took the troops off of the Russian border. We don't like him at all, but we hope he's going to be reelected. I was going, wait a minute, I don't understand. But then I quickly understood that the certain was far more important than the unknown. They didn't like him, and they all wanted him reelected. Now, all is a great stretch. It was all of the people we were interviewing, for sure. So we determined that while the people in Poland were open and direct, not one of them, and these were all disproportionately affluent people based on how that sample was derived, and we knew that. Not one of them had traveled to Russia. Not one of them. Nor were they wanting to or planning to, and they cautioned us that we should not be going. Interesting. We also then left from Poland to go to Russia. We had been told that being in Russia doing the type of research we were doing was more problematic and that we needed to follow some different protocols. We uploaded all of our data before we ever left an interview room. Although the time difference was inconvenient, we uploaded anything we wanted to say orally or in writing to a trusted source at the university, confirmed it was there, and then erased everything from our computers before we ever left the room. A colleague of ours, 2 weeks before we left we were in both St. Petersburg and Moscow for the research interviews. had their computers taken at the airport when they were leaving and lost most of their data. So we made sure that our data were no longer on our computers. We also did not request that our interviewees sign the normal university-informed consent forms, even though they had been translated into Russian, as they had also been translated into Polish. Again, normal protocols for using that kind of materials. No one wanted a signature. I can now say, because he is no longer living, that the person in the interview that was the most profound to me in terms of impact was with Boris Yeltsin's communication director. I did not use his name in any of the published research because that would have been dangerous for him at the time of that interview. Nor will I continue to do that even retrospectively because of family members and others, although I think that danger is past. Our interviewees in Russia, to a person, and again, this was interesting because they wanted us to know, in addition to asking about trust, they said, well, one of the things we totally distrust is the use of technology. And they said, you know, in the West and in the United States, you are writing about, and we were in 2012, we were calling Russia a somewhat backward environment for not using technology. They laughed somewhat satirically and said, would you use technology? Did you drive by that KGB building and where Putin comes out of that? The surveillance which we are subjected to is so extreme that even if it has nothing to do with the government, if it is a good idea or creates unusual money flows, particularly with the West, we will have severe limitations around our business. So of course we're not going to use technology. It has nothing to do with our innovative capabilities, it has to do with how we are going to do our business. Interpersonal trust was key. Of all of the business people that we interviewed, those who were the most successful by their own accounts, verifying this independently in Russia was much more difficult, were working with people they had met in college or high school. And these were people in their 40s or 50s, but they maintained long-term interpersonal relationships. Telephones or in-personal meetings were far more prevalent than the uses of any technologies. They all knew how to use them. They were perfectly aware that Russia was being depicted as backward in technology and for good use. They told us to a person without us asking that Putin was planning to make changes, cracking down, and that the West was being foolish about thinking they were making progress in relationships with him. They also told us about the changes in the textbooks on the narratives around the satellite countries and the former Soviet Union. This is 2012. So hearing all of that, having all of that in our notes, and then the invasion of Ukraine, not was surprising, it was just haunting. We also know that on a couple of occasions we believed, because at night we had an interpreter with us in the daytime, but my colleague and I, Dr. Morelli and I, were by ourselves at night. And the Russian people were absolutely lovely to us. The cultural experiences were lovely. The museums were wonderful. I enjoyed being in Russia thoroughly. At night, in a couple of restaurants, the large men standing by our coat racks, looking at us throughout dinner, was a little unnerving. And then when we would go to our coats, to get our coats, they would leave. And so we would ask our interpreter the next morning, and they said, absolutely, that is meant to tell you that they know what you're doing. Because they said, our Secret Service are so good that if they didn't want you to know they were there, you would not know they were there. And so we thought, we received the message, it's fine, they're fine, we're fine. We left the country with no issues. I have been told I probably can't go back based on what we've written, and I'm not planning to go back. But the reality was, we saw polarization, history in dispute. What we would say is the history is certainly not the history that's being propagated within Russia. The Polish history leaves much more emphasis in the schools, in the young people, on the past and the context of the past and the fear of what that might mean in the future. And at the same time, the distrust of what can happen when you live in a region of history in dispute. Polarization and distrust colors virtually everything. So, fast forward to 2016. We had grant money and decided to do a national survey using the same trust drivers, the work we were doing in Poland and Russia, on the election between Clinton and Trump. Not surprisingly, and this was survey versus interview data in all 50 states, both Trump and Clinton had relatively low, less than 50% trust ratings across all 5 of the drivers. Although Clinton routinely outpolled in all 50 states Trump in terms of trust ratings, even until the end of the election. However, in the states where the most emphasis was placed on whether or not Clinton lied, her openness and honesty ratings declined. And in fact, based on, and this is why I think seeing how important trust in the behavioral sense is important, those states ended up being the states in the Electoral College that created the victory for Donald Trump. Now, there are a lot of other things going on, of course, not suggesting there are not. But when we looked at our data the night before the election, it predicted that Clinton would have the popular vote and that Trump would have the Electoral College based on the trust data. Now, there were other data that said the same thing, obviously, but that's what happened. But the power of the difference that trust makes was driven home. We did the same thing in mid-election, same methodology when it was just looking at Trump again. Those people who had trusted Trump in 2016 trusted him more, and those people who did not trusted him less. We saw a country become increasingly polarized. Then we had the pandemic. We saw rhetoric from the White House, which was divisive and contradictory at best. We saw concern, one of the drivers in trust, expressed in local communities. We saw people identifying with the values and care and support for each other. Now, the dynamic nature of a pandemic makes reliability, one of the drivers of trust, pretty darn difficult. But we saw Anthony Fauci considered highly reliable, even though he was giving messages that had to change. Now, not to mention the racial tensions, the economic pressures of the time, and then the 9/6 insurrection based about lies about an election being stolen. So what does all of this mean on a 9/11 anniversary? And in the meantime, we think about Ukraine. And the title of the presentation, well, and I want to make sure, okay, we're doing all right, I think, because I want to get to the positive, because all of this is relatively negative. Well, largely negative, but I'm going to frame it where it isn't as negative as it sounds. But I should be studied for my positivity gene. I mean, there's just no way around it. But when you think about control of information, history and dispute, polarized communities, lies, growing distrust, you have to worry about the United States. Or I do. But there are things that we can do. So the conclusion, when you look from 9/11 to the present, we are not Russia, not even close. But we are not honoring some of the basic tenets of trust building to the extent that we can and should. And the degradation of our ability to talk across profound differences is concerning. So what can we do? What I want to do is just offer some commitments for you to think about and then return to the 5 drivers and ask you to think about them personally, because anything we do has to start with us as individuals, has to continue with us as individuals, and then work collectively. But the first commitment, and by the way, I should back up and say, over the last 20 years, we've worked in organizations over longer periods of time and actually seen improvements in the trust profiles. And I don't mean in terms of surveys or statistical work, but in terms of employee retention, in terms of improved outcomes, in terms of improved relationships, in terms of improvement in being able to get the job done, by focusing on, we want high trust, but we're going to have to behave that way to get it. We're going to have to do things in order to get it. We can't just say, I value it, therefore it is going to happen. So let me give you a series of commitments that I think matters. And the first one is democracy and history matter. And I'm not talking about a political process. I'm not just talking about elections. I'm talking about civic involvement, power and economic structures. Who gets to decide? Who is at the table? Who is intentionally engaged with change? And I'm talking about in churches, in nonprofit organizations, in our community, in our neighborhoods, and of course I am talking about in the electoral process. But we control a great deal at a very, very local level. A lot is happening in this community right now. One of the things I've challenged myself to do, and all of my friends, and I'm doing this, I have left some nonprofit groups that I really value. And I'm working in a couple that I value what they do, but I don't know much about them, and they are not in the part of town where I live. And I'm meeting people who have some really different perspectives than I do, and different perspectives than I am exposed to when I come here on Sunday. And perspectives that challenge my thinking. And I'm learning to really listen again. Listen to understand, even when it's just like, ooh, how could they say that? But I need to learn. Because if we don't learn to bridge these, and I'm not always good at it. The other day, I think I almost broke a tooth. I was gritting my teeth so hard. I'm serious about that. But if we don't do it, we're going to end up more polarized than ever. So I'm encouraging everybody to find a group that does something you think is significant, and then see how to learn and be a part of that group in a sincere way. Second thing is we've got to reject our hyper-individualism. This is hard for me. I'm an individual. I love working with groups, but merging the needs of the individual with the needs of the community. We've got to get to know our neighbors, and particularly those, particularly with different perspectives from ours. It's so fun to be back together as this community, but boy, there's a danger in that. If we just stay with this community. And boy, it would be so easy because we've been through so much of the pandemic and everything else. It just would be so fun to just rest a while. And we should not. And as tired as I am, working as hard as I am, which I shouldn't be doing at this point in my life, I don't want to let myself off of that hook. The next challenge and commitment I'm making is that silence matters and we need to get over it. I sit there at times and I am silent and I know I shouldn't be. I have been silent here because I know some of the rest of you will do it. Some of the rest of you will open your mouth and I don't have to, and it is such a relief. I won't point to who will, but I can count on you to do it and I don't have to, but that's not fair. And particularly when you see people who need to have a voice, we have the privilege, usually most of us, to help that voice along. And that is the fourth, is abandoning our isolation privilege. We all have different identities, which protect us from having to engage in seeking, advocating, or working for change. I've got medical care, lots of other people don't. I have a good education, or some days I think I do, and some days I think I don't. I have housing, other people don't. One of the best things I've done by moving downtown is I have a whole new group of people I see regularly, and one man that he and I have a friendship of sorts who has chosen homelessness, and he sits on the bench where I park my car every morning. And we talk almost every morning when he's there, when I'm there. And so I have a new value for why he has chosen his life. I know when his dad, who is a affluent businessman, comes to visit him from the East Coast, and it's a way of life. I don't understand. I just can't get it, but I'm getting it. I'm trying to get it. And it's a learning for me because I didn't have a homeless friend the way Steve and I have become friends now over about 4 years. It's different, but I think have a growing respect. I hope. I mean, he's pleasant to me, but but I have learned from him probably a lot more than he would ever learn from me. But abandoning that privilege so that we know that we have a special responsibility to help people who do not have the privileges we have. Another commitment is to use facts, science, and knowledge to explore new ways of thinking. And then sometimes it's easy to say, well, our problems are so big, we just can't do anything about them. But we can. If we work on big problems with small steps, wonderful things can happen. I remember years ago when we started housing families who were homeless in the church here. And I remember, because of our work schedule, my husband and I cooking breakfast, and how much I looked forward to just bringing breakfast in. And I know it's all changed and become a different kind of situation, but that was a small step to a bigger piece of service for homelessness. And then the final commitment that I would raise is focusing on trust building in all that we do. Realizing that whether you believe it or not, everything you do, whether you like it or not, contributes to whether you're trusted or not. Now, I want to return to these 5 drivers for a moment. The best thing, if you take anything out of this today, that I could leave you with is to ask yourself the questions about the drivers. Are you open and honest? I mean, I don't want you to answer out loud because that would be embarrassing if you had to say no. If you say no, that you're not, I'll talk to you later. But, are you open and honest? Most of you, if you're truthful, will say, well, with most people I am. But there are some people I wouldn't be fully open and honest. And I would have to say that's me. I am open and honest with almost everyone, but there are a few people that I just can't take what they're going to say if I were fully open and honest with them. Okay? So I'm being open and honest with you, and I won't tell you which of you in the pew today it is that I'm not going to be open and honest with. No. I am probably best at being reliable. I will tell you what I'm going to do. I will tell you what I'm not going to do. And I will tell you if I'm going to have to change. I've learned that from being at the university all those years. And I've learned that it is a fatal flaw for a chancellor not to remember to say she has had to change a commitment she made. It's a fatal flaw. So I learned how to do that one better. The next one, ask yourself, how concerned are you really for the people around you? It's easy to say we are concerned. We as a church have some very good statements of concern. And I think we are concerned. Don't misunderstand me. I think we've shown a lot of empathy and concern and hard work in that area. But concern is always in what we say and what we do, and how they are perceived together, whether we show up, and if there is a contradiction between what we say and what we do. We say that everyone is welcome here, that we're very inclusive. There have been a couple of instances in the past 3 or 4 months when someone came in and was a bit rude, and boy, we were not welcoming at all. I was concerned that the message that sent around us, not just to the person where that instance occurred, but to anybody new who was seated around and was seeing that occur. Now, that's my perception. There may be more to that story. But are we really walking our talk? Are there people who come here that no one greets? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. We have to always look at ourselves. I think we mean what we say in our statements of inclusion. I do. I think we fundamentally and profoundly mean that. But do we do it all of the time? That's what I'm saying. Do we do it on a continuous basis? I'm probably as guilty as the next person of rushing out like I have to go to work in a little bit. So do I always do what I should be doing? No, I don't. I don't. I remember, for example, I'll give a very clear example. I was in a big hurry the last time I saw Andy Court. I knew he didn't look well, and I had to get to work. Well, I feel badly about that. I didn't have to get to work as fast as I thought I did. So that's on me. I didn't express the right amount of concern, or even the concern that I felt. So Judy doesn't know that. Andy didn't know that. So that's on me. So I'm talking about myself. I'm not talking about any one of you. Identification is perhaps the most obvious. It's so tough. It is so much easier to like people who think like we think. I mean, it is so much easier to like people. I mean, people who thought January 6th was justified is just hard for me. I am sorry. And if you think that way, please come and talk to me after this presentation so that I can get better at this. I'm not sure I'll speak to you, but no. Please do. I need some help with this one. I truly do. But we need to learn to talk with people who don't value what we do. The sermon this morning, Leanne, thank you so much, because I am one of the people who actually reads the Bible at least 5 times a week. That's comes from my grandmother. And I am reading my grandmother's Bible right now, and some stuff is falling out of it that she put in it. I have more ancient Bibles I have all the family's Bibles. If you need a Bible to do anything Leanne is asking us to do, you come to my house. I have dozens. I can give them all to you. But this is a holdover from my grandmother. And my grandmother taught me this. But my grandmother also, in no way, would have had trouble talking to people that I just want to roll my eyes. I've been trained not to roll my eyes. One of my previous people at the University of Colorado to whom I reported rolled his eyes historically, and I learned not to. But identification's tough. All of us get along better and trust people we identify with more than people we don't. And then finally, competence. It's really hard to admit that it's hard to be competent in everything in order for people to trust us. Well, we're obviously not competent in everything. But if we want to build trust with others, we have to understand what it is that we need to be competent in. What is it we're working on together? What does it mean to be welcoming in a church environment? What does it mean to be competent in a work environment? And how do you stay competent? So ask yourselves those questions. And then realize that trusting relationships bring out the best in all of us, but only if we work at it. So I think we fail ourselves if we become a culture of distrust. I appreciate you coming and listening to this 20 years of research in 35 minutes. And so if there are any questions, I was told to keep about 5 minutes for questions. If not, I will let you go home and I will go to work. All right, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Steve.
Hi, Steve.
I really have two questions.
Sure.
The first one has to do with when trust is broken, can it be restored? And the other one is just something I'm wondering about. Back in the summer of 2016, when you were still chancellor, you had to approve Donald Trump coming on campus to speak at a campaign rally. And there was quite a bit of protest. I was there and I remember. How did that affect you and the trust between you and faculty and other administrators on campus?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, two questions. And Steve, thank you for asking that. The first question, when trust is broken, can it be rebuilt? Yes, it can. But it can't be a one-sided effort. If it's between two people, it's going to have to take both people to want to rebuild that trust. And it's going to have to take the ability to have a genuine understanding of what was the problem. It can't be, I will never do this again, kind of a relationship. Now, maybe it means I will never do this again, has to be one of the promises that's in that relationship. But yes, it can be. But there are, and we've worked out even some protocols for the kinds of conversations and monitoring of behaviors at an interpersonal level for groups, for teams, et cetera. Yes, it can be. Number two is, many of you probably will remember that Donald Trump came to campus as actually Barack Obama had when he was running for president in 2012. First of all, when you're a public institution, you cannot not lease space to a candidate when they are paying for that space. So you know that in the case of Mr. Trump, that there's going to be all sorts of issues. We knew that, and we were preparing for that issue, and there were many protests. The one thing we did not know was that we had a space, we had all of the contracts for the amount of people that would go into that space. We did not know that the Trump campaign, and this is all public records, so I do not feel that I am misrepresenting anything, for a space that held 1,600 people, gave out 10,000 tickets, which contributed to the numbers of people who arrived on campus believing they had a ticket to a rally that they in fact did not have a ticket to. We absolutely expected a large number of protesters. What we did internally, however, was work with faculty and staff all the way along the way in preparation for what that day was going to bring. And we knew it was going to be difficult. We worked with the city, we worked with all sorts of other emergency personnel, including the FBI, and in addition to CSPD and other kinds of events around the country. And we had incident command established. We knew it would be difficult. The faculty and staff, while not happy, many that he was there, understood from a freedom of speech point of view that he had to be there, and were very helpful. Faculty and staff walked with me throughout the campus most of the day. Before his arrival, I had to be in incident command most of the time during that time period, and I refused his request to put more people than was safe into the venue, which did not create a happy situation. And if words could cause someone to be deceased, I would not be doing this presentation at this point. But that's the way it is, and that was my job, because people could get hurt if that would have been the case. So it was unpleasant. I did not feel a great deal of unpleasantry from the campus community or the community of Colorado Springs. There was a lot of unpleasantry from the broader community. Between that and the Milo Yiannopoulos visit, I had over 100,000 emails to deal with. Yeah, but not from El Paso County or from the campus.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you have a sense from your research in Russia about to what extent the Russian people believe what the government tells them, particularly as it relates to the war currently?
I don't have any way of knowing what they believe about the war right now. I would love to know. What is frightening me is that our colleagues with whom we had all of this rich communication, who were university professors at St. Petersburg and in Moscow, are dead silent. See, they can't email us at all. And I mean, they have emails, but we don't hear anything, and that bothers me a great deal. I do know that when we were there was enormous distrust of what Putin was going to do. But to what extent he has tremendous control of the narrative. And, you know, the blackouts on social media, everything else. Satellites give us a lot of hope. Some of the alternative communication infrastructure gives us a lot of hope that people are hearing it. But it is a very difficult situation. And that's why it just so concerns me when we have large segments of our population who certainly have the right to disagree with the outcome of an election, but to believe things that are not empirically verifiable just worries me, because that's a very slippery slope. And I don't know, and we don't know how it is in Russia. No, I don't know. I would be foolish to say I do. We may have some better intelligence, but I'm not privy to it. I'm not anymore at all privy to it. The colleagues, the article that we just published, we wanted a couple of our colleagues to be able to review it in Russia. They couldn't look at it. Some Russian researchers reviewed it, but they're here in the United States. They're safely no longer going to be returning. Makes me very sad. Because Russia is a beautiful country. The people were lovely to us. We went to the ballet one night, and of course Sherry and I don't speak a word of Russian. We couldn't find our seats, and these lovely people went way out of their way to help us find our seats and help us try to figure out what we were doing. They didn't speak any English, we didn't speak any Russian, and most of our experience was wonderful with this overshadow of control.
Any more questions? Well, this is a talk I think I hope it recorded well, because I think I'm going to listen to the whole thing again and take notes like a college student. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really
Thank you. Thank you.
And just real quick, next week we have Dan Miller. He's a lawyer who's relatively new to our congregation, discussing the constitutional question of abortion, where we started, and recent developments. It should be dynamite again. So thanks for joining us today. Hope we see you next week.